Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome back to another new episode of The Lager Line, again served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm Ben Dubose, your host, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, and contributor to Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. Again, joined by Paulo Alves, our co-host and producer out of Portugal. You can follow him on Twitter/X at Paulo Alves NBA, and me on there at Ben Dubose. So, as we chat this Tuesday, April 15th, it's a very busy week for the Rockets. The play-in tournament game between the number 7 seed Golden State Warriors and number 8 seed Memphis Grizzlies is tonight. The winner will be the 7 seed in the playoff bracket. The Warriors, well, they're both 48 and 34, but the Warriors have the tiebreaker. That's why the game will be in San Francisco. But really, it's not the 7 seed. It's the 7th spot in the standings. And then the 7 seed in the playoff bracket will be determined by tonight's late game in San Francisco. The winner will play the Rockets. So you'll either have a Rockets-Grizzlies series in which every other game is on NBA TV. It's fine because first-round games can be broadcast on local television as well. We'll all be watching the Space City Home Network crew, Craig Ackerman, Ryan Hollins, Vanessa Richardson, all great people, friends of the program. But Rockets-Warriors would be box office. You would have a lot more primetime games. I suspect that would be a Sunday ABC afternoon start. The NBA has announced that the Rockets series will start on Easter Sunday, April 20th, but we do not know the time just yet. I think that will depend on whether it's Rockets-Warriors, that will be an ABC draw, or if it's Rockets-Grizzlies, which will be a TNT draw on Sunday night. So we know where the Rockets are themselves in the standings. Number 2, 52 and 30. Really, we should consider them 52 and 27 because they took the foot off the gas with nothing to play for in the final 3 games of the season. All losses against teams, the Clippers, the Lakers, and the Nuggets that were playing to lock up their own playoff seed. So 52 and 27 was where the Rockets were the last time we saw them truly dialed in, playing hard, and winners of 15 of 17 games. And so, Paulo, I'll bring you in on this because the last couple of pods, you were traveling in Rome. So I did a couple of mini episodes in the interim. But our last pod together was 2 weeks ago. At that point, the Rockets were in the number 2 spot, but by about just a game over Denver and LA. We were talking about how the season could play out over the final 10 games. And we said the baseline was just getting in the top 6. That was not a given at that time. The realistic goal would be top 4 home court advantage in at least one round. And the stretch goal would be a top 3 seed, home court advantage in at least one, possibly 2 rounds, and on the opposite side of the bracket from the Oklahoma City Thunder. And not only did they accomplish the stretch goal, they're on the side of the bracket with the Warriors or Grizzlies, and then the Lakers and Timberwolves. The winner of that would be your potential second round opponent. But they clinched the 2nd seed, home court advantage in at least 2 rounds with 3 games left to play, allowing them to be very conservative with minutes and appearances over the final 3 games. As discussed, that's a big part of how the Rockets go into the playoffs on a 3-game losing streak, which, in my opinion, means absolutely nothing. So, Paulo, let's start with the 30,000-foot view because you have not been on the last couple of pods. If someone had told you this scenario 2 weeks ago, that this is where the Rockets would be entering the playoffs, this is where they'd be in the standings, what would you have thought? What's your 30,000-foot view assessment on where we are as the playoffs are a little under a week away?
And so my main takeaway is actually that so I was in Rome at the time that we beat the Jazz, the Thunder, and the Warriors. So if you guys want to, find me back out there for the first round series and the second round series, we'll probably be champions. So I'm just gonna throw that out there. But other than that, if you, as you were asking me, if you told me that this would be the outcome, well, it depends on how you phrase it. If you told me, oh, in the last 7 games we'll be 3 and 4, I'll probably say, damn, how did it fall off that badly? But then when you talk to me about the games before, they tell me that 3 of those losses were actually just because we don't really care about the games anymore because we had already clinched not the 4, not the 3, not the 5, but the 2 seed. I'll probably say, okay, this is probably one of the best seasons of probably the top 3 season in the last 15 years, probably so. And so I think it does kind of sting a little bit that we go off on a 3-game losing streak. Although we didn't care about 2 of the games, right? It always feels nicer to win, even though the games are completely meaningless. And it would have felt a little bit nicer if we put up more of a fight against the Nuggets. Although, you're not. It's one of those things. You're not going to win many games when Dylan Brooks and Jalen Green had the games that they were having.
Let me jump in on that real quick. I really think this particular Rockets team is going to be disproportionately bad when there aren't stakes because this team's formula is so dependent on peak effort. And for Jalen in particular, look, Jalen definitely struggled in that game, 0 of 7, 0 points. Well, Jalen, he's not especially big. He's an okay shooter, but he's certainly not great. For Jalen to be at his best, it depends on him playing with a lot of burst, a lot of pace, going into the paint, finishing through contact, drawing fouls. Those are risks you don't want to take if primarily you don't want to get hurt before the playoffs. So I think the Rockets overall, with how reliant they are on defense and peak effort crashing the glass, and for Jalen specifically, who's not a Steph Curry archetype of a player in terms of how he generates his offense, I just think this team in particular, even if they do play their regulars, the losses against the Clippers and the Lakers, for the most part, they didn't. The game against the Nuggets, they did, at least for the first 2.5 quarters. I just think this particular Rockets team, if there aren't stakes and if the effort is inherently going to be a little bit lower because they don't want to get hurt, this is a team that's basically made in the lab to look artificially bad. And so that's another reason why I wouldn't take much out of that.
Yeah, 100%. I'm not taking anything away from it. And there wasn't, and if you follow me on Twitter, you'll know. To me, there wasn't much of a incentive to win this game at all, because unless the Jazz beat the Wolves, if you beat the Nuggets, you were going to get the Nuggets in the play, and they would likely beat the Grizzlies. You'd likely face the Nuggets in round 1. And say what you will about them having firing their coach, I don't want to face the best player in the league in round 1 under any circumstances. And so, whether we're a good matchup or a bad matchup, now it doesn't matter because they're on the other side of the bracket. But there was no incentive to win. The more important thing about the last 10 games, that since you guys haven't heard from me since, is obviously the fact that you beat the Thunder and the Warriors back-to-back in convincing fashion. Those are 2 statement wins, and I bet you if the Rockets had the chance after that Warriors game, if they could have just sent the guys to Cancun or shut the season off, and not have the next 3 games be played, they probably would have done so. If they could have ended the season there and played in the playoffs a week later, that's probably how they would have wanted to, go off. But regardless, I think it shows you that they were trying their hardest. Those were the 2 games that clinched, obviously, the 2 seed. They were against 2 teams that most people would have us lose a series at that point, would have us lose a series against in the playoffs. The Warriors were obviously in the, I think, 15-game winning streak with their starting lineup that they played against us, and we were the ones that broke that streak. And obviously the Thunder are the Thunder. They were at full power. And you saw those games really felt, I didn't watch them live, I rewatched them. Those games really felt like playoff type atmospheres. And it is something that we'll get onto as we analyze playoff games, but it really made me feel like, we talk about how will Sengun perform in the playoffs, how will Jalen perform in the playoffs, what guys will rise and which guys won't. These 2 games showed me that, as unbelievable as it might sound, Amen Thompson has another gear defensively. And that's scary because he's already a defensive player of the year type player. And, he showed us on Shea and on Curry that, hey, listen, there's another gear that this guy can hit. And that's scary in the playoffs, both offensively and defensively. But for this year, defensively, even more so. And it will play a critical factor into how we match up against, the Warriors if they win specifically. If we beat them, how we match up against Luka and LeBron, because that's our one argument against all of these teams, that I don't remember in any time any recent playoff history a team that had as many excellent defenders as we have, one-on-one defenders, and has varied the type of defenders as we have. Typically, teams have one or two defensive specialists. Sometimes it's a guard and the wing. Sometimes it's a guard and a big. We have a man who can defend at an elite level 1 through 4. We have Dylan Brooks, who you probably don't want on shifty guards, but he's an elite defender 2 through 4 probably as well. He will play on some 5s. You have Tari Eason, who has more. He's more of the type. He was more of a length defender who you can throw on guys like Kawhi, for example. And you have Jabari Smith, who's a switchable guy that you can, if you want to go small, you can very comfortably go small and switch every action defensively. And to me, that's a massive weapon in the playoffs. People talk about, oh, this team doesn't have, a critical go-to scorer in the clutch that can just generate offense out of nothing. That's not easy to double like Sengun. Well, I'd argue the opposite. There's no other team in the league that has as many weapons defensively, individual weapons that you can deploy specifically in matchups as much as we do. And I don't think there's been a team like that in a really long time, at least from memory. Even when the Rockets were running those bunch of wing defenders that they used to do in the Morey era, you didn't have this type of defensive talent. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a team as good defensively, spread out throughout the roster as the Rockets currently have. And it's just as much of a weapon as a guy that can be guarded, right? If you have Shea, you have a guy that can be guarded, right? If you have the defenders that we have a lot of matchups that you can just negate out of other teams. And that if deployed correctly, you can completely shift the way a series works, because if you're gonna have call for a switch and go from Jalen Green to Amen Thompson, from Jalen Green to Dylan Brooks, from Dylan Brooks to Amen Thompson, and from Amen Thompson to Tari Eason, and from Tari Eason to Jabari Smith Jr., you're going to milk like 20 seconds a clock basically every possession, and you're not going to get that favorable matchup anyways. I think, especially with the defensive mind as smart as Ime Udoka, if he's not too stuck on with his rotations and playing and having to play Fred and having to play Jalen, if he's completely free and he loses those shackles that sometimes it feels like he has, we have one of the most unique defensive arsenals that you'll find out there in the league. That in itself, to me, is as much of a weapon as it is to have 2 stars paying max money, but at the same time, you're paying max money to 2 stars, so you have that offensive, strength, but all of your other role players are, probably defensive liabilities or can't shoot or not anywhere near the elite defense that we have. And so that's what those 2 games kind of showed me. It was like, you're not going to find guys, and you're not going to find teams that can hold Shea to 22 points and 2 free throws. You're not going to find guys that are able to hold Steph Curry to 3 points. And it wasn't because Steph Curry was cold. It was because Amen Thompson was on him all night. Like, it was one of the most impressive defensive performances I've seen in recent memory. It was just like someone put in a man's mind that he was going to shut these guys down, and that's what he was focused on. And to me, that's, that was really eye-opening. And I've talked earlier, and sorry for going on for too long, but I've talked on previous pods about how this season has kind of shifted the way I look at basketball. And I think this is another one of those things that I never thought about that I'm thinking about now, which is what I just said. There are offensive weapons, and that's typically what people look for. What people look for. What matchups can we exploit? I think there's also defensive matchups that you can exploit, where you have you're gonna have your stars running away from this guy on offense, and you can put this guy in different positions and completely throw off offensive flows. And in a league where you have less and less true ISO guys, you're going to disrupt a lot of offensive schemes by having the type of defender that the Rockets have. And I know we'll talk about more in specific as we head into the playoffs, but that was my main takeaway from those 2 games. Was like, Amen Thompson has another gear defensively. And for a guy that was already, to me, all defensive first team, a defensive player of the year contender because Wemby's hurt, it's kind of terrifying that guy still has another year to go to.
Well, and to your point on the volume of defensive options, I think that's something that people around the league may have forgotten about, because it's been a while since we've seen it, at least on a consistent basis from the Rockets. Really, it feels like there's been multiple iterations of this team, and we've talked about this in the past, where the way they started the year in October and November is not how they finished the year. Now, you can argue that maybe this 15-2 stretch leading into the playoffs was the most encouraging of all, but it wasn't the exact same formula that they had to start this year. And a lot of it's because of the injuries. And yeah, this attrition happens to most teams over the season. But I think with this unique formula that you're describing, really ever since Jabari Smith Jr. went down with the broken hand at the end of January, they haven't been whole other than for 1 or 2 games here or there. So you haven't had the volume of switchable wings who can cover such a diverse range of positions on the other team, in that you had 6 weeks without Jabari. When he came back, you had the hellacious scheduling stretch with a lot of back-to-backs, which took out Tari for half of those games. You had Amin going down for a couple of weeks in March. You've had Fred VanVleet, who isn't certainly a defensive stopper, but he is important from a communication standpoint, stability, those things defensively. You also had, down the home stretch of the year, Jabari struggling with ankle and groin issues, which they say are minor, but thankfully he has over a week. Basically, he'll have 2 weeks to rest because he has not played since that Golden State game a week ago Sunday, and the Rockets won't open until game 1 on Sunday, the 20th, Easter Sunday at home against either the Warriors or the Grizzlies. And full disclosure, we're not going to talk too much matchups in this pod because by the time you're listening to it, the play-in game late tonight may have already happened, so there'll be a short shelf life. We'll come back to matchups a bit more when we record later in the week and we know who the Rockets are actually going to play. This pod is going to be focused primarily on the Rockets and things that are within their control, regardless of who they play. Key takeaways down the home stretch of the year as the Rockets get ready, and they're going to practice this week, Wednesday through Friday at their new training facility, perhaps Saturday as well. They have a lot of time to get ready for this first-round series, and there's things that are within their control, regardless of who the opponent is. But to use those two teams, the Warriors and Grizzlies, to illustrate your point, Paolo, I think with the Warriors, they're going to send Steph around a maze of screens as they did in that game. And there's going to be some possessions, even if the man is defending out of his mind, that the Warriors are successful in getting him switched off, especially because you can't risk giving him even a sliver of daylight all the way out to 30 feet. It's Steph Curry, the greatest shooter the game has ever seen. Well, if you're also having Tari Eason, Dillon Brooks, Jabari Smith Jr. out there, it's pretty tough to find a matchup that's clearly more favorable. So the diversity of the guys you can throw, and of course, if you do switch out, well, you're letting Amin off the hook for possession, so he's conserving energy. There's a lot to think about. And then the Memphis Grizzlies, look, if we're talking about the Rockets versus the Grizzlies or the Rockets versus the Warriors, the games against Golden State have been a slugfest. Both teams, their offensive rating against each other in 5 games would be the lowest in the entire NBA for the season as a whole. Against the Grizzlies, it's been much more up-tempo, high scoring. The Rockets have actually had a top 5 offensive rating if you extrapolated it to the season as a whole based on their production against Memphis. But the Grizzlies have been much better offensively against the Rockets than the Warriors have. And I think one of the things that the Grizzlies bring to the table, you've got, when they're healthy, and they should be, guys who can score at 3 different levels and in 3 different ways between Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. Well, the Rockets can guard all of them between, you can stick Amin on Ja, you can stick Dillon Brooks on Desmond Bane, and there's some personal history there, so I think Dillon would be very jacked for that matchup, and Dillon seems to do well against the more physical types anyway. And then you can have Jabari to defend against Jaren Jackson Jr. We know that, one of the big weaknesses for the Rockets against the Grizzlies, there were those 3 games in January. The Rockets won 2 of them, but they all went down to the wire, and the Rockets really struggled to defend Jaren. Well, Dillon was just a little bit too small. That will not be the case with Jabari. So between Jabari on Jaren Jackson Jr., Dillon on Desmond Bane, and Amin on Ja Morant as the point of attack guy, you have different types of defenders who can cover all of their options. And that's if Memphis is your opponent. If it's Golden State, it's the fact that having so many diverse options makes it less appealing to draw those switches the way that we know they try to do. It makes it, I shouldn't say less appealing. It just makes it less likely to succeed. But the bottom line is, and I think this is your point, Paolo, the Rockets having this many guys that can defend this many ways, it makes it way tougher to hunt out a specific mismatch than it typically is for a team like that in the playoffs, right?
Yes, and even if you do get a mismatch, let's you'd probably, for most guards, the closest thing you can get to a mismatch on the Rockets, if they want to, be playing, if they want to play small, it's probably Jabari. If you want to not be playing small, you're going to have Sengun out there. And Sengun's, it's something that you should probably be doing anyways when if you play the bigger lineup without Steven Adams. And when they do play Steven Adams, this sometimes happens as well. You just have Sengun overcommit to the perimeter, and you trust that your 6'7" or 6'8" Amen Thompson, uber athletic, your 6'11" of Jabari Smith, your 6'8" of Tari Eason, and and if Jalen Green's out there or Dylan Brooks is out there, not small guys for what would be the one. You just trust that those guys who are athletic, who are active on defense, will just be able to make those rotations, and you're kind of picking your poison. And even after you go into the ISO, even if you do get an advantage, you're looking at a stacked roster of guys that are basically built in a lab to recover from whatever advantage that you created. And so, especially don't want to hone in on the Warriors too much, even though I think they'll be our matchup. If you watched the Clippers game last night, Steph only needs a sliver of space to get a shot off. But in the overtime, the Clippers had no trouble forcing everybody else to beat them, and we saw how that ended, right? And so, especially if they are the matchup, I'm not worried about Jimmy Butler. He's tough bucket getter, but we have the perfect defenders for that type of guy. And besides him, he might be hurt. We don't know. But besides him, we have more than good enough defenders to deny, as we did when we beat the Warriors. We have more than good enough defenders to we don't let Steph beat us. And I'm pretty confident that in most cases, and I don't want to jinx it, but I'm pretty confident in most cases, our offense is good enough to beat a team of Brandon Podziemski, I don't even know, Buddy Hield, and the rest of Moses Moody, beating us. And it's not like they're going to be getting straight up open shots because, as I said, our guys are athletic and fast enough to be recovering, especially when they're playing in playoff intensity. So that's my main takeaway from the end of the season is that we were, and I think rightfully so, wondering earlier in the season or a couple of weeks back how our advantage of just being more active than other teams in the regular season will translate to the playoffs. And I think it really showed that, well, we have another gear too.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about Golden State specifically if they win this game later tonight. We'll have plenty of time because the series is not starting until Sunday. But I just think they do illustrate the broader point that you're getting at. As a side note, watching that Clippers-Warriors game, I went in sort of agnostic in terms of which result was better for the Rockets in terms of who falling to the play-in range. But it was just striking in the fourth quarter and overtime how many more options it felt like the Clippers had to generate good shots. And I also think it kept Golden State's defense on its toes because you could go, one possession Harden, another Kawhi. You had big buckets by Norman Powell and Zubac in there as well. Whereas the Warriors, it felt like they were much more limited in terms of how they could generate offense. And Steph Curry was absolutely brilliant in the fourth quarter, and that's something that if that ends up being your matchup, he can swing a series by taking over a Game 5 or a Game 7. He actually did that in Game 7 at Sacramento a couple of years ago in a first-round series where the Warriors were the lower seed without home court advantage, and they ultimately got it largely on the back of their veteran experience, and that would be a factor if they end up being the matchup. But it was just a reminder watching them struggle to generate any offense outside of Steph of just how much the Rockets are able to potentially take them out of their comfort zone by making Steph work. And it's not just that game in April. It's this entire season. The Rockets have held the Warriors to, I think, it's either 103 or 104 offensive rating, but it would be the lowest in the entire league. And what's striking about that, there have been 5 meetings. The first one was that game at the very beginning of November when the Rockets, they're playing the Warriors without Steph, and they fell behind by like 70-40, something ridiculous at halftime. And then the Rockets ended up actually pushing it to overtime before eventually losing. But the point is, they were terrible in the first half of the first game defensively, and yet for the 5 games overall, they've still been outstanding. So that tells you how great the final 4.5 games were as they got more comfortable with how they wanted to defend the Warriors And yes, it is translated to when they've had Steph, and it's translated to multiple games with Jimmy Butler as well. And I think it speaks to, the level of defensive options the Rockets have. The Warriors are always a team that the Rockets sort of circle on their calendar from an intensity perspective. And that's the glass half full way to look at the Rockets going into these playoffs is, look, Ime Udoka is a really good coach. We know they are dependent on trying hard. Well, not having any back-to-backs, having all this rest before, and especially if you draw the Warriors, who we know this team, certainly the franchise, the fan base, but even this group. Look at Tari Eason last year, and the Warriors come out and play. Anything that brings out peak focus, peak effort, and certainly Ime Udoka and the culture he's built ties into that as well. That's usually to the betterment of this team, and Golden State typically does that. And so I think, some of his personnel, some of his attitude, but I think those are all reasons why, even though the Warriors would be favored against the Rockets nationally, I actually like the Rockets' chances. But again, we'll pause that discussion for a couple of days. I promise we'll come back later this week if, in fact, the Warriors do win this game later tonight against the Grizzlies. One other thing I want to discuss as far as the close to the season right off the top before we turn our attention fully to the playoffs and some of the key variables, X factors to watch from a Rockets perspective. Let's talk about the Phoenix Suns. I had a little segment about this in the last pod that I did by myself, Paolo, so I think our listeners already know where I'm coming from on this, but I do want to update the final standings. The Suns finished with just one win in their final 10 games, so 36-46, tied for the number 9 slot in the draft lottery with Portland. There'll be a coin flip in a few days. Not yet, because there's other ties, and some of them depend on the play-in tournament results. So after the play-in tournament is fully complete, the NBA will have coin flips in. Either Phoenix or Portland will be the number 9. The other will be the number 10. But with the flattened lottery odds, as we've gotten accustomed to the last 4 years, actually, with the Rockets rebuilding and or having high draft picks because of the Brooklyn Nets, we know that if you're in that middle to latter part of the lottery, the odds are much better now of you jumping into the top 4 and getting one of those 4 lottery picks than they used to be, because the NBA wants to discourage tanking. Now, whether it's working, we can debate that. But the fact of the matter is, the cold hard math, if you're at number 9 or number 10, you have a much better chance of moving up. And you only need to go back 11 months to see it. The Rockets were at number 9 in the order last year via Brooklyn and moved up to number 3. That's how they got Reed Shepherd, who had a nice close to the season. And the Atlanta Hawks were in the 10 slot right behind them. They ended up jumping all the way to number 1. And that was the Risache pick. So if you want to believe in the Cooper Flag dream, it's not implausible coming from the 9 or 10 slot, because the 9 and 10 slots last year went all the way up to number 3 and number 1, respectively. So I think we're at a point now. The point I made on last week's pod, and I'm curious your thought on this, Paolo, the 2025 angle of that Nets-Suns deal that the Rockets did involving the future picks has already canceled out. The Nets, even trying to tank this year, having their pick back, finished 6th in the lottery order. You cannot tell me that they would not have been a few slots higher had they not, or a few spots worse, had they not had their pick and thus had no incentive to tank. I think they would have been right where they were a year ago, which is the number 9 spot, winning 35-ish games in a pretty bad Eastern Conference. So basically, when you consider the incentives, the pick the Rockets are going to have in the 2025 lottery from the Suns, which will allow the Rockets, by the way, to swap from their own pick at 27 all the way up to 9 or 10 in the pre-lottery order. Lottery will be on Monday, May 12th. Side note, how cool would it be if the Rockets are playing that night and they have both a second-round playoff game and a chance at Cooper Flag in the draft lottery? I'm not sure anything like that has ever happened with a playoff team before. We can dare to dream that the Rockets will somehow accomplish that feat this year. They'll have to win a first-round series to get there. But the larger point that I want to bring you in on, Paolo, to me, the 2025 angle has already canceled out, in that had you not done that deal, the odds you would have and the pick you would likely get from the Nets this time a year ago is pretty much exactly the same as what you have locked in at number 9 or number 10 from the Suns this year. So basically what the trade is now is the 2026 Brooklyn pick, and this is a world where the Nets would not otherwise have had the incentive to tank. But even so, even if you want to have the most bearish outlook on Brooklyn possible, and they're a big market team, as we've talked about in the past, so they have some shortcuts they can take if they wanted to. even with the most bearish outlook possible, though. Nets 26, for Suns 27 and 29, and Dallas 29. The Suns being just a train wreck. KD likely to leave this offseason, and even if he doesn't, he's going to age out. Dallas looking like a train wreck as well with the Luka trade aftermath. I don't know who in the world wouldn't grade a hypothetical deal of the Brooklyn 26 for 2 Phoenix picks in 27 and 29 and a Dallas pick in 29 as a home run. Like, that's potentially, depending on how it turns out, Rafael Stone statue level moves to get those 3 picks, which might be the most valuable future picks from another team in the entire NBA, for 1 Brooklyn pick. That's basically what this trade is now, because the 2025 angle, in my opinion, has totally canceled out. So, Paolo, what's your perspective on, I guess, A, how the Suns finish the season, and B, what the implications are for not just their future, but for that trade and the way we evaluate it?
Yeah, it might go down as one of the most lopsided trades of all time. And when you package it with, this is still 100% just trading things that we got for Harden in the first place. And so right now, before this year, it's standing at Tari Eason, who's a key rotation piece, who I'm 200% sure they're going to extend as early as they can, because they love the guy, and their models, their analytics models absolutely love him. And obviously anybody that watches basketball absolutely loves him. So they got Tari Eason, Reed Shepard, who we don't know what he's going to be yet. He was the number 3 pick in the draft. And now they're going to get a top 10 pick, most likely, in this draft. And then they have, 2 more Suns picks in 27 and 29. And they have a swap with the Nets in 27. And the Nets are now looking like they're going to be a good team in 2027, especially if they don't win the lottery this year. And they're going to get a 2029 Dallas first-round pick, who by that time, AD is going to be old and washed. Kyrie is going to be old and washed. They're not going to have any assets, or basically any assets, to actually build a decent team around it. They're in the West. They're not going to be any good. That's another premium pick. And you got all of that for, what was an MVP caliber player, but who asked out. And this is the best position it could possibly be. Like, I truly, truly think the only team in the league, or the only 2 teams in the league in a better position for the next 7 years than the Rockets are OKC and the Celtics. Because the Celtics have 2 young superstars and a great coach and a really well-built roster, and guys that are cost-controlled through a very large number of years. I think they'll be good for the next half decade. The Thunder, purely because they have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and we don't have a player of that caliber. But besides that, you are currently in the position the Celtics were in before they drafted, or probably before they drafted Tatum, where you are a playoff team and you have a terrible team's future, or 3 terrible teams' future, while you contend. And this allows you to pay everybody. This allows you to pay Amen. This allows you to pay Sengun, Jalen, Tari, Jabari, anyone you want, because at the same time that you're paying them, the rest of your rotation, your role players, are going to be dirt cheap, because they'll likely be coming from draft picks. You can trade down and take lower ceiling, higher floor players. You can negotiate it you can kind of build your roster in any way you want, because it's basically the exact same thing that people are accustomed to doing in the NFL, which is, and in the MLB, which is, all of the great teams have great guys on rookie contracts coming in, and they allow established stars who are about to get paid sometimes, that you feel are the most discardable. You allow them to go because you have guys coming in to take their places. Like, the Rockets are likely going to have a lottery pick, I will actually say, I would call it right now, the Rockets are likely going to have a top 10 pick this year, not next year in 26, but in 27, in 28, in 29, in 2029. At the same time, they have the 2nd seed in the West that everybody says is the toughest conference, and their entire rotation, or 6, not 6, probably Jalen Aman, Tari Bari, Sengun. I'm forgetting someone. So 5.
Got a
5
core 7 potentially. Come on.
Yeah, but my point is, you have 5 of your key rotation guys playing 30 minutes a night, 5 of them are under 23. Like you have a playoff rotation on a 2 seed in the West made of 5 under 23 players. And you have by far quality-wise the best asset chest in the league. Like if I can guarantee you, I don't play 2K anymore, but when I started watching basketball, I used to, and I was, glued on what was it, my league. I was glued on my league, and I would exploit all of the trade mechanics, and a lot of the times I would not get as good of an outlook as we have right now. That's how crazy this is. Like you don't get to be a really young team as a 2 seed with the best assets still to come. There are rebuilding teams right now that have stripped their entire teams from any good players that don't have the asset pool that Rockets have right now, just from their draft picks. Like the Jazz sold everything they had; they don't have better picks than us. The Wizards sold everything they had; they don't have better draft picks than us. I'm trying to bring up the rest of the rebuilding teams. The Hornets obviously don't have better draft picks than us. Brooklyn sold off all they had. They don't have better draft picks than us. The Suns, the Spurs, the same thing. The Blazers, the same thing. All of these teams traded away superstars and they do not have better draft picks than us. And we have those, if we were to start a rebuild from scratch right now, we'd probably be one of the best rebuilds in the league just from the assets that we're going to have coming in. But we have that plus a playoff caliber team, a top 2 seed in the West, playing right now full of young guys. That's how insane our situation is. And before I hand it back off to you on this trust stuff, I wanted to make a quick point on, I'm not gonna bank on us winning the lottery 5 years in a row because that has never happened. And I will remind everybody that winning the lottery by definition is getting a top 4 pick, because the way the lottery works is 4 combinations of numbers are drawn, and those are basically the teams that move up into the top 4. Nobody is, pegged into kind of placed into the top 4 by default. There are 4 teams that are picked, that those are the teams that win the lottery. And Rockets have been picked the last 4 years. That's why they've had a top 4 pick the last 4 years. If your combination does not get selected, you fall to 5th, even if you are the worst team in the league. So they've won the lottery for 4 years in a row. I'm not saying it will happen again, but I will say that last year, pick 9 and pick 11 moved up going into the lottery. The year before, the lowest pick to move up was 5th, so that one is, you can throw that one out. The year before that, the Kings moved up from 7th. The year before that, the Raptors moved up from 7th. The year before that, the Hornets moved up from number 8. The year before that, the Pelicans moved up from number 8, and the Pelicans moved up from number 7, and the Hawks moved up from number 11. The year before that, the Kings moved up from number 7. There is always teams moving up from the latter part of the top 10, moving up to the top 4. It might not happen this year, but this to say that even though the odds are, I believe, 17% at this point, there is a pretty good chance that one of these teams is going to move up. It's just about us being the lucky ones that move up. And last thing I'll say, just to explain how this coin flip stuff works, because a lot of people don't get it. The odds between 9 and 10 are because they have the same record, they are evened out. They are averaged out. The Rockets and the Blazers have the same odds at every single pick, except for one thing. And this is why the coin flip matters. The coin flip matters in scenarios where neither team moves up and nobody from below the Rockets and the Wolves, so from 10th to 14th, moves up. It matters because if a team moves up, obviously, if they have the same odds of moving up. So if the Rockets or the Blazers move up, it doesn't matter. But if they don't, the coin flip decides who gets pick 9 and pick 10 if the status quo stays the same. So if the Rockets win the coin flip, they'll get pick 9 bar any change in the between those two teams. If the Rockets lose the coin flip, they'll by default get pick 10 going into the lottery. So if nothing crazy happens, they'll get 10 and the Blazers get 9. If they win the coin flip, the Blazers will get 9. The Rockets get 9. The Blazers get 10. However, we do not get the 9th pick odds at moving up, and they don't get the 10th pick odds at moving up. That the coin flip only matters for the situation after the lottery is drawn. So basically, the odds are the same. It only matters. It's the coin flip basically decides if our picks will pick higher or one pick lower on 9 versus 10.
Scenario.
Yeah, which might, matter, depending on, I haven't done too much draft work, but 9 versus 10 is probably in this draft from what I've been seeing, the position where you're probably going to be in a good place to grab a guy that's falling from a tier above. I think I think there's probably a tier break at 7, but even though the tier breaks at 7, there's always guys that fall, and so being at 9 versus at 10 might matter if one of the top 7 falls, and you might be in a position to grab them, which is, to be fair, kind of Rafael Stone's bread and butter, because he's gotten some of his best picks by just taking the obvious guy that's been falling in Tari Easton and Cam Whitmore,
Yep.
For example. So, and Ime Sengun as well.
And we'll do more draft talk after the playoffs end. I don't want to spend too much time on that today, but I just think it's a important time to highlight, with the Suns season coming to a close, one of the most disappointing ones we've seen in the modern NBA, just how brilliant that move was from Rafael Stone. And it should have you feeling good about not just the present of the Rockets, but obviously the future as well, for the reasons you laid out. By the way, I mentioned the Thunder by accident. One of the small downsides of moving up, I had this in my notes. If a team like the Rockets moves up, and I did my latest sum of them moving up, had the Rockets getting to 2, well, the Thunder end up getting a pick because you jumped Philly. And if Philly falls to 7 or below, that pick would go to Oklahoma City. So one of the small little things to think about is that if you move up, you do probably give Oklahoma City a mid-lottery pick. But honestly, if you're getting a top 4 pick, you will happily take that trade, especially because, from a trade perspective, a lot of this, we've said this before, comes down to tiers. Do you have enough to be in the game for a big time player? And then it just depends on if that player wants to go to you. And if he does, you can make it work. The Thunder clearly have enough assets. The Rockets do as well. So from that perspective, if the Thunder get another pick, it's really not going to matter that much. It's more about the scenarios where you need the player to develop yourself. And that's one where I don't think fans are considering those scenarios enough. Maybe the Rockets don't need to make a big trade. Maybe they're good enough as is. And so you just use these picks, these lottery picks, that is, this year's a lottery pick, and we hope there's more from the Suns and Mavs in the years ahead, to fill out your roster with cheap role players, value contracts in the years ahead, just as your current team, your current core 7 is getting more expensive. Obviously, Jalen and Sengun will be on year 1 of their extensions next year. The same will be happening with Jabari and Tari the year after that, and Ben and Cam the year after that. And so potentially you don't even have to make a big trade. You just have this as a pipeline to keep churning out good role players around your existing core, because we know the current CBA of the NBA is going to make it much more difficult to have highly expensive teams with lots of good players. Tough decisions are going to have to be made, and one easy way to bypass those would be if you have a pipeline to just keep getting good young players on rookie contracts that can fill in the gaps around your existing core. Anyway, let's turn our attention back to the playoffs as we wind down the pod. Again, I don't want to do too much matchup talk today, because we'll have more of that later in the week once we know who the Rockets are actually going to play. I want to talk from a roster perspective, who we're going to learn the most about in this playoff run. Who you think are going to be the X factors or the key variables for this team. Because I've seen some of this talk on social media and on other pods. I actually have a different take than a lot of other people. I think, the common answer to this question with the Rockets is going to be Jalen Green, but I don't think it really changes for the playoffs. I think we've talked a lot about the volatility of Jalen's performances, and some of it has to do with his archetype as a player. But I don't think that much is going to change with Jalen in the playoffs regarding how teams cover him, how other teams attack him. He is who he is, and hopefully more shots go in the playoffs. I think he had a good close to the year. He's generally gotten more consistent. I'm not that worried about his subpar close to the season over the final week for reasons we discussed earlier in the pod. I don't think his game is conducive to, even though it's admirable he wants to be out there for all 82 games, he's now played and started in 186 straight, third longest streak in the NBA. I don't think his game is conducive. We saw this in the final week of last season as well, to games in which he doesn't want to get hurt. I just don't think he has the size or the skill from a shooting perspective to be particularly efficient in those settings. He needs to be playing hard, absorb contact, get to the line, finish through contact, things that he's not going to do if the games aren't meaningful and the primary motivation is just not to get hurt. But the larger point with Jalen's inconsistencies, I think a lot of that is baked in. And it's a question that's been ongoing for Ime Udoka's 2 seasons and counting as Rockets head coach. So I don't really view that as a unique X factor for the playoffs. I think that's something that's been there and will be there moving forward until Jalen takes a leap into another class as a player, which hopefully he will. But I think at this point in year 4, he is who he is right now. And any massive leaps are probably going to be next season or beyond. As far as the playoff run in particular, the one guy I'm looking at the most is Alperen Sengun, because I think, and it's not so much about LP specifically, it's more his archetype as a player. We know this is the type of big man that gets targeted in the playoffs in team-specific game plans in a way that often isn't over the regular season, or at least not on an every-game basis. So, for instance, if it's the Warriors, we know they'll try and play 5 out at times with Draymond at the 5, as they've done for 10-plus years now. As long as the Warriors have had the death lineup, the so-called death lineup at least, it's not as lethal as it used to be, but still in spurts can be useful. They'll try and play Sengun off the floor. And conversely, there's matchups where if it's the Grizzlies, they play pretty big with Zach Edey and Jaren Jackson Jr. in the front court, or maybe it's a combination of the two, and the Rockets play very big to try and offset the small ball lineup, because the Rockets' counter to a team playing small could be to go double big with Steven Adams and Alperen Sengun and maybe Jabari Smith at the 3, to where the size and the rebounding is just collectively too much, and the Rockets just bludgeon their way out of those small ball lineups. But the common thread that ties it all together is that in all of these situations, it's not going to be just one of 82 games where Sengun goes out and mano on mano has a chance to win his matchup. No, he's going to have to play and be used in different ways. And so maybe it's defending on the perimeter against a smaller lineup. Maybe it's functioning as something of a 4 on offense because the Rockets think or feel they need to go double big themselves. But the point is that it's not a situation that he's never going to be a traditional 5, but on both ends of the floor, Sengun is going to be used in this playoff run much more differently than he was for the majority of the regular season. So how is he going to fare defensively, offensively, used in roles that aren't, in a perfect world, you just let him go out one-on-one and dominate in the post the way we know he's capable of doing. Well, the matchups and the way teams choose to cover and attack the Rockets in the playoffs may make it to where, and probably will make it to where, other usage patterns make more sense. So how does Sengun handle that? How does he defend in the perimeter? How does he fare in the double big lineups where he's something of a power forward? That's the big X factor, because we're going to see on both ends of the floor, we're going to see that much more in the playoffs than we did in the regular season. We saw it a little bit in the regular season, but in the playoffs, when the team you play can dial up a Houston-specific game plan, that's going to be more of a challenge for Sengun and the Rockets than it was in the regular season. It's not going to be a fish out of water. They've dealt with it some. It's not that we have no data on it, but the relentless nature of the way teams will try and hunt out any potential deficiency you have in the playoffs is different. And so from that standpoint, Sengun's archetype as a player, to me, that's the big question going into this playoff, how he's going to hold up, and ultimately, does he provide enough value offensively to where it's still worth it to play him big minutes relative to anything he potentially gives up defensively. Again, not a shot at him, just his archetype as a player. We know the way traditional bigs are often exploited, or teams try to exploit them at least, in the playoffs in the current pace and space version of the NBA. As a secondary guy, and this is sort of an offshoot of the Sengun storyline, I'm also watching Jabari Smith Jr. because there's been a clear trend this season that the Rockets are at their best when they have Jabari Smith Jr., and specifically the elite version of Jabari Smith Jr. They are 40-19 when he plays, 12-13 when he doesn't, and they are 16-2 when he plays 15, or when he scores 15 or more points. So I think it's pretty clear Jabari is the variable that can take this team from good to great. And in some of these scenarios where Sengun becomes something of a concern for one reason or another, then having the option in your back pocket to go to the other extreme and play Jabari Smith as a small ball 5, I think that's useful. I think having Jabari, for the reasons you outlined earlier, Paolo, as another type of defender that you can throw into the mix along with Amin, Tari, and Dylan, that's important because of the versatility, because of your ability to defend different types of players, to be able to switch the way we know Ime Udoka wants to do, especially when the Rockets dial up team-specific game plans. And so they can hone in with a defensive-minded coach on exactly what they want to do, than having different types of switchable wings. I know we call Jabari a big, but really he could be both a big and a wing. It's just depending on how you want to play in a given game, series, whatever the case may be. But I just think that, at least for me, Sengun is the big question. That's the biggest variable. And then as sort of a subplot of that, Jabari would be my second guy, because if Sengun does run into trouble, or if Sengun gets into foul trouble, perhaps, for some of the reasons we laid out earlier, then Jabari is a really useful insurance policy. So I left a lot on the table for you. I think, Fred VanVleet is an obvious one because the Rockets have been at their best when he's able to make shots. We know how he struggled a lot in the second half of the year. I'm not too worried about Fred. I think with the rest he's gotten, I'm cautiously optimistic that we've seen down the home stretch of the year, including that Thunder game, when he's gotten rest, he's been better. And so he's going to get a lot of time off. I think Fred's going to be fine. You can certainly make the argument for Jalen. I'll accept some for Dylan and Tari Eason as well. But for me, it's Sengun and Jabari. Those are the two guys that I feel like may make the Rockets sink or swim. Those are the two I keep coming back to. Paolo, who are your X factors, variables, just speaking broadly, independent of any unique matchup factors?
So to me, I just can't get away from the obvious answer because to me it really is the obvious answer. To me, this team will sink or swim based on Jalen Green. You need, as we've talked about throughout the entire season, you need a perimeter playmaker in the playoffs. You need someone that can make shots, and you need someone who can take. Like if Jalen is on one of his, really hard to guard kind of mindsets, and he's getting the calls and he's getting to the free throw line and he's making his threes, they take some immense amount of pressure off of Sengun. And to me, the way the Rockets will lose this series is if teams are allowed to double and triple team Sengun, and because we're not a good enough shooting team, we need someone who to be a shot maker from three and from everybody and from everywhere else. And Jalen's not there, and Fred's clearly washed, and that's how we lose a playoff series. To me, that's the only way we not the only way we can get just shot,
But the most
outshot
way.
But that's the most plausible way for us to lose a series. And so you need Jalen to be focused. You need Jalen to be having a smart shot selection. But more importantly than that, because this is the playoffs and not all shots are going to be smart, we need him to be making the tough shots that he's going to take. We need him to be making those mid-range shots, those timely shots that he has been making. He's not been shooting lights out for, the couple of months after his really hot stretch, but he's been making really timely buckets, right? And we need that. That is the most important thing, because even if Fred can bail us out of a game, he's also going to shoot us out of a couple of games as well, because he's not that good anymore. I'm sorry if that offends anyone, but that's just the way I see it. And that ties into what my second X factor is. My second X factor is Ime Udoka. He is perhaps the one guy that nobody would put a blemish on as far as playoff experience, because he's had one playoff run and he got to the finals. To me, he is the X factor because of how willing will he be to move away from the guys he trusts. This team is clearly not at its best with the current starting lineup. We typically get ourselves into a hole and we climb out of that hole with the double big lineup. It's been happening for a while, and because we've been winning games, it hasn't mattered. Come the playoffs, we might not be able to sustain this type of rotation much longer. It might come a point where this team's just on certain matchups straight up better starting big, starting Jalen, Amen, Dylan Brooks, Jabari Smith Jr, Alperen Sengun, or Tari Eason in the place of one of those guys. And it's going to be up to Ime to be not really brave enough, because I don't think it's brave, but to be flexible enough to think that this might be one of the solutions. There's also the argument that there's probably going to be series where we're going to want to be starting the double big, and when we're starting the double big, I think there's a good argument to be made that you probably shouldn't be playing Fred VanVleet as a starter when you start double big, because Jalen can take advantage of the Steven Adams screens well enough, and he's shown prowess in handling all those actions with Steven Adams and Alperen Sengun, and you could really, really use the size around them and the ability to get offensive rebounds because of how much Steven Adams contributes a lot to those offensive rebounds and to the size. But having the extra guys out there does so as well. And I think that will probably be one of our best lineups. And, I'm talking about benching Fred VanVleet. I'm not benching him from the get-go, but being, open to that possibility.
Or he
And
doesn't
I'm not
play 35 plus minutes just because.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I should probably also talk about the possibility of benching Jalen. I'm not really talking about that because I don't think it's a question if he'll do it or not. I think if Jalen's not playing well, he'll just bench him and that's it. I haven't seen the willingness to do it with Fred VanVleet. If Dylan Brooks is shooting us out of games, you should be open to considering that as well. Play Aaron Holiday. There are worlds out there. There will be games where playing Aaron Holiday is better than playing Fred VanVleet. And I know that's probably a really hot take to a lot of people, but there will be games out where our best lineups that should be playing those 30 to 35 minutes are the double bigs with Jalen at the point of attack, or as the main ball handler. And in some of those lineups, all you're going to need from Fred VanVleet is be a spotted shooter. And if he's not making those shots, Aaron Holiday is like a 45% 3-point shooter this season. Let me double check that. I believe he was at points during the season. He is currently at 40%. All right, it's not 45, it's 40%. Doesn't matter. It's elite anyways. There will be points in playoff series where, Jalen has got it going. And if Jalen's got it going, the need for Fred VanVleet goes down even further. And it's just the worst way to go down is to go down because Fred VanVleet's thanking you, and the second worst way to go down is to go down because Jalen's having a bad game and you're leaning too heavily on Fred VanVleet and he can't make shots. You need to be able to be open to the possibility of not playing Fred as much, of not playing Dylan as much if need be. You need to be, this team has a lot of variables and a lot of guys that can be in. There's a lot of pieces that you can plug in and plug out, and you need to be cognizant of those possibilities and willing to take those risks and not go down with the ship as much as it has felt like it sometimes happened during the regular season. So first one is Jalen, because if Jalen's cooking, none of this probably matters. If Jalen is cooking, we have a two-headed monster with an elite defense. We'll probably beat most teams other than 2 or 3 teams that I'll talk about as we go further into the playoffs. But if he isn't, and especially if Fred isn't shooting lights out, Ime Udoka is the key factor because that's one of the things that I haven't seen from him during the regular season, which makes it a question going into the playoffs, which is his willingness to not play his vets if that's what's best for the team, no matter how much that breaks up kind of the hierarchy within the team, for 2 reasons. First of all, because the playoffs are the time where you break that hierarchy and you just throw everything at the wall. If coming out of the playoffs, that hierarchy is broken, guess what? Fred VanVleet has a team option. He can just not bring him back, and that potential problem solves itself. And when you think about the best playoff coaches, when you think about the Eric Spoelstras of the world, the Ty Lues of the world, the guys that are really known for their in-game adjustments, they're not stuck to some preconceived principles that come from the regular season. They're willing to try whatever it may be. Just thinking about the series against the Lakers in the bubble, Frank Vogel, to me, completely outcoached Mike D'Antoni back then because he saw that Markieff Morris was a complete mismatch in the answer to what we were doing. And the guy that was barely playing played a key role the entire series, and that won them the game. That won them the series. And even though it worked for one game, and he kept doing it. And I'm just not quite sure that Ime Udoka will be as kind of light on his feet or as agile in maneuvering potential little advantages, matchup advantages that we may be able to get. I think he'll be really smart about it defensively, but offensively, I just don't quite trust him yet. And he might evolve into guys saying guys should have made their shots and they haven't. And there's ways that you can, there's little advantages that you can get. And to me, that's why Ime Udoka will be the second X factor for the team.
Yeah. I think that's fair. It's just, I have a little bit less concern about Ime simply because I'm more bullish on Fred VanVleet. It's just, and I admit a lot of this is a hunch, but I like the way he moved against the Nuggets. He made a few threes. I love the way he played against the Thunder, made shots, took a secondary role as Jalen scaled his usage up for the obvious reason because he was cooking. And I trust Fred. He's delivered in big spots before, and I think he's the guy that on paper profiles to benefit the most from this extended break. It's been a disappointing year for him, but one thing I think a lot of people forget, that month of January when the Rockets were at their best or close to it, before all the injuries hit and the schedule tightened in the beginning of February, Fred shot 39% from three. He was trending upward. He was a big part of them winning those games against great teams, like the two against the Grizzlies, like the two against the Cavs, the win in Boston. And then he got hurt. He's never been the same. He tried to come back, and then he hurt the ankle again in the first game back. I think this break benefits him. He's a guy I trust from an intangible perspective. So all your points are completely valid, Paolo. I have a hunch that they may be a little less important, that dynamic, because Fred ends up playing better than what we've seen for the better part of the last 2 months, really, ever since the start of February when he got hurt. Your points on Jalen, I completely agree with. It's just, I guess my perspective is it's just sort of baked in. It's nothing new for the playoffs. That's the same as the regular season. For me, it's Sengun and Jabari that I'm focused a little bit more on as far as the playoff variables for this team. But full disclosure, there will be some variability depending on who the exact opponent is and how the matchups go. And honestly, that's what makes the NBA playoffs, in my opinion, so much fun to discuss, because unlike, baseball or football, where just crazy things can happen because the sample just isn't big enough, typically in the NBA, a 7-game series, there are some outliers, but for the most part, a 7-game series is enough to determine who the better team is. It just comes down to how players are used over those games. And, it's a chessboard in terms of how guys are deployed and who could spam the right actions and do it at the right high leverage moments. To me, that's what makes the NBA playoffs fun, in that, randomness can be fun from a fan perspective if you're a casual, but if you're a diehard and you want to understand either does your team advance or the reasons why they didn't, if they don't, then to me, the NBA playoffs, there can be a little bit more of a sort of linear nature to the way things play out. And so hopefully it's for the better, but regardless, it makes for a more interesting discussion, in my opinion, because it's easier to understand why things happen or don't happen. Anyway, closing comments. I want to get your predictions, Paolo, on the Grizzlies-Warriors game. Well, I mean, you can do a prediction, but more what you're cheering for. And also Lakers-Timberwolves. Because I think most of us would be in alignment in terms of predictions. I think there's a lot of data on who the better side is. But I'm more curious which is better for the Rockets. Because I'm a little torn. I think one clear tiebreaker for me, and hashtag Houston Sports, I always think of things through a negative lens, at least part of me does. It'd be way easier stomaching a loss to the Grizzlies than it would another loss to the Warriors, given all the baggage. I will say, I think this whole narrative of Rockets, Warriors, and all the history, that's a storyline for the fans, for sure, and ownership. I don't think it's a storyline for Ime Udoka or the current players, especially because they won 2 of the last 3 meetings, including convincingly in Golden State a couple of weeks ago. I think that angle is going to be much more in the social media bickering between the fan bases than it is a reflection of what's actually going on should those teams meet. With that said, my personal preference, yeah, I would hate playing the Warriors simply because if you lose, boy, it would be brutal. Now, conversely, if you win, it would be amazing. My God, would that feel good? But that's a heavy lift. I think even though they'd be the 7, the Warriors should be favored over the Rockets. I personally don't think they should be. I'd give a little bit of an edge to the Rockets, but the Warriors would be favored, and there are legitimate reasons for that. I do think, though, the matchup between the Rockets and Warriors relative to the Rockets and Grizzlies is a little closer than the average fan will think. A lot of fans seeing Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Jimmy Butler, Steve Kerr, the big names, and the history between the Rockets and the Warriors, and then the Grizzlies being relatively anonymous. They just fired their coach. Rockets went 3-1 against them this year. I think a lot of people will be cheering hard for the Grizzlies in that game tonight. And I understand why. However, I don't think the gap is as big as a lot of people will make it out to be. I think each matchup brings its own advantages and challenges to the Rockets. The Rockets-Warriors matchup, the Rockets were much better defensively against the Warriors than they were against the Grizzlies. I think it's a matchup that, especially with Amen Thompson as your lead guy against Steph Curry, profiles very favorably for the Rockets. I also think the Warriors, as veteran-laden as they are, there's a lot of mileage. Game 7 was the term Steph Curry used to describe that Clippers finale, and it felt like they left it all on the floor by the end of it. Steph has the bad thumb. He didn't want to use it to get up off the floor. Jimmy Butler took the knee to the quad from James Harden. Draymond Green went to the locker room with a neck or shoulder issue early in the game. There's a lot of mileage. The Rockets have a lot of bodies they can throw, and they've held up very well defensively against the Warriors all season long. So I still think Memphis is a better matchup, but you could argue for Golden State, and there's a reason why both of these teams finished with identical 48 and 34 records. It's closer, the margin, than I think the average fan on Twitter or Reddit or whatever the platform may be will think. However, I still lean Memphis simply because if it's close, I'd rather not deal with, and I think any of these series are likely to go 6 or 7 games. I'd rather not deal with the potential of Steph Curry doing what he did in the fourth quarter against the Clippers, where it felt like, to me at least, it looked like LA was a way better team. They could generate offense far more easily. And yet, if Steph just got a sliver of daylight and he went off on almost perfect shooting, 18 points in the fourth quarter, that nearly stole the game, even though it felt like the Clippers were far more talented overall. I go back to the song lyric, might not be as good as I once was, but I was good once as I ever was. If it gets late in the series, and that's basically, I mentioned earlier, the parallel to Warriors-Kings a couple of years ago. I know it's stylistically not the same in that those Kings were not a good defensive team. The current Rockets are. But where I do think there are some parallels is that once it got late in the series, even with the Kings having a huge home court advantage, Steph Curry and Draymond Green had the pedigree to steal that. They do in this situation as well. So I'd rather not, in a late series, high leverage scenario, I think they're not going to get rattled. Conversely, the Grizzlies, who just went through a coaching change, they're the type of team, if you get off to a 2-0 start, they might get a little bit rattled because there's clearly not a lot of internal belief that they have enough to figure it out. And then the other reason why I would lean Grizzlies, in this particular case, I would rather mitigate a weakness than accentuate a strength, in that all the data suggests that the Rockets would be better defensively against the Warriors, but I trust the Rockets, especially with Ime Udoka, to figure it out defensively no matter what. So I would rather feel more confident offensively. That's been the variable for this team. We know they've been top 5 most of the year defensively. It's the offense that's been middle of the pack, but they've been very good offensively against Memphis. I would rather take the matchup that plays more to the Rockets offensively and trust that Ime Udoka can figure it out on the defensive end. And so to me, that's where, even though it's likely to be higher scoring, and you could make a counter argument and say, oh, maybe the Rockets should prefer a series that's in the mud, which it feels like it would be with a lot of low scoring games against the Warriors. In this particular case, I would rather gamble on the side of providing a stimulus to the offense and trust that the defense can eventually figure it out, because Ime Udoka is just, say what you will about the guy, he's not a perfect coach, but defensively, culture, and especially with time to hone in on one specific opponent, I trust him to be very good. That's why I prefer Grizzlies. It's not as much as I think the average fan will prefer, and I'll certainly be, I'll love to troll the Warriors if they lose tonight to the Grizzlies, which I think is definitely in play. I don't think it's a given the Warriors win this game at all, because, boy, did the Warriors ever empty the tank against the Clippers in a one-game scenario, which is inherently volatile to begin with. I could see Memphis winning this game. I don't think it's a given at all. I would enjoy Memphis winning, but I don't think, and I do think it'd be better for the Rockets, I just don't think the gap is huge. And then with the other series, I'm sort of torn on this one, LA and Minnesota. I think I would probably lean to, as a Rockets fan, wanting Minnesota to win, simply because if it's close, I'd rather not err on the side of playing LeBron and Luka and the refs and everything that comes with that. I don't think the Lakers are a terrible matchup for the Rockets. We talked about that. You have to throw out that game where nobody played. And then the one before that, where Gabe Vincent and Dorian Finney-Smith went 12 of 24 from 3, and Fred VanVleet went 2 of 14. I think the Rockets played okay, and they were right there, even night 2 of a back-to-back. And the Lakers barely eked that out. So I think either way, it's a good matchup. And there have been times this year that the Timberwolves have scared me the most, based on Anthony Edwards, Naz Reid, Chris Finch, the pedigree they have getting to the West Finals last year. But I think it's close enough where I'll take my chances with Minnesota. And historically, Gobert has been a very good matchup for Alperen Sengun. So we talk about him, or I talked about him being a variable. I think that's a series where Sengun would fare very well against Minnesota. So I don't have an overwhelming interest in Lakers Wolves, but I think I would prefer Wolves, simply because if it's close, for many of the same reasons why, I don't think the Rockets have a huge advantage or disadvantage against any of these teams. All of these series will be somewhere between 45 and 55%, in my opinion, in terms of probability. So we're talking about very fine margins for much the same reasons why I wouldn't want to take my chances with Steph Curry. What if he goes nuclear in a game 5 or a game 7 on the road where the Rockets have home court advantage? Maybe it doesn't mean as much when you have a guy like that can take over a game. The same can happen with LeBron and Luka in a way that it certainly can with Anthony Edwards, but you have two of those guys, and Anthony, as good as he is, I wouldn't put him at quite the tier all time that certainly LeBron, but even Luka are at just yet. I think I prefer seeing Minnesota win. So those are my long-winded answers. Definitely Grizzlies over Warriors, although the margin's a little bit closer than I think the average fan thinks. At least for me, the margin is closer. And then I think I'm cheering Timberwolves over Lakers, but to me, that's basically a coin flip. I don't see a huge difference there. Paolo, where are you at as far as rooting interest for those two series? One series in the case of Timberwolves Lakers and play-in game in the other case.
Yeah, you're flirting with the take. I'm actually going to go with it. And it's not because it's a hot take or anything. It's genuinely what I believe. I think the Grizzlies are going to win the game.
Ooh.
And I would rather the Warriors win the game.
I actually predicted, so I did Locked on Rockets with Jackson Gatlin today. He made me pick. I actually predicted the Grizzlies to win the game, but I still said that I wanted them to win the game as well. I didn't say as much. I didn't go as far as you are to say I want the Warriors. So I like this take.
So I want the Warrior. I think the Grizzlies are going to win because Jimmy Butler is clearly hurt, and I don't think he's going to be 100%. And I think the Grizzlies just have too much scoring for the Warriors, and I don't think the Warriors have enough defenders to throw out there to beat a fully healthy Grizzlies team. And so I don't think they're going to be able to score enough. And then why I want the Warriors to win is very much tied into that as well. I watched that Clippers game, and you saw, oh, this is Steph Curry doing Steph Curry things. He almost won. And what I saw was Steph Curry was absolutely unstoppable, and he still lost. That's what I saw. And
they had a 10-point lead because they got a hot start. It really felt like the Clippers were the better team for most of that game. To your point, yeah, I would agree with you on that. It did stand out. Now, some of that, I think the Clippers are really good, even better than I thought. But it also just felt like, to me, the Clippers were clearly the better team. I see what you're getting at.
Yeah, and it felt like Steph Curry had to be an absolute superhero in the fourth to keep them in the game. And then Jimmy Butler had no slouch of a game whatsoever. And to me, they were they were hanging on because Draymond Green made a crazy three and Brendan Pazinski made a crazy three normal three in the clutch. And Kawhi missed a shot at a game winner, and he had just made one prior to that when Draymond fouled. And it felt like they had no answer for Harden, which is a very diminished version of James Harden, and they still had no answer. They had, I believe, Gary Payton the third on him, and he couldn't do anything. It to me, I know the Clippers are good, and Kawhi Leonard is one of my favorite players of all time, but it to me felt like they were completely outclassed, and Steph Curry was, clawing his way, trying to win that game, and he was his best self, and he still couldn't. And because of that, and because of how they match up with us, for two reasons. First of all, because, as you said, grueling season, very old team, a lot of bumps and bruises on their star players. I do not trust whatsoever Brendan Podziemski and Moses Moody and Looney. I do trust to some extent, but still not the same player he used to be to actually beat us. And I think you can take Steph out of the game basically at this point. You can double team him on screens. You can just, there's some actions that you won't be he will still get shots off. But I think that they are a one-man show, and I don't think Jimmy Butler by himself can beat us. And this might get clipped in the future, but I think I'm much more confident in us defending them well enough, in us being able to score well enough against them with our defense than I am on potentially catching a scorching hot Grizzlies team. Desmond Bain seems like he always kills us. Ja Morant is one of those guys that if he's on, it's really hard to guard, and we've never had an answer for Jaren Jackson Jr. for the last few years. And he's the one type of guy I don't really think Ime Thompson can solve, just because of, just too long, too crafty. You're gonna foul him a bunch of times. And I don't even want a man being the primary defender because I don't want a man in foul trouble, and I'd rather keep him fresh and be able to help on him rather than be the primary defender. I know we've beaten the Grizzlies. They've always been tough games, and we've played good enough offensively in those games against the Grizzlies. And I don't know if that's going to translate to the playoffs. What I do know is going to translate to the playoffs is our defense, and I trust our defense to hold the Warriors. I trust us better. It's a lot of the same reasons why I don't think we have any shot at beating the Celtics. I think we have a lot better of a shot against a tough defensive team because we're going to beat them at their own game versus a potential
style.
versus a potential team that's going to force you into a shootout, and there's nothing you can do. I would still back us to beat the Grizzlies, but I think against the Grizzlies it's a 7-game series. I think against the Warriors it's 5 or 6. Like, I'm really confident we beat the Warriors, and I think. And besides that, you're worried about how it's going to feel if we lose. To me, it's going to feel like garbage regardless if it's the Warriors or not. I'm not going to watch or consume basketball content for a while if that happens. Either the Grizzlies or the Warriors. But if we do beat the Warriors, it's the storybook, start to this contending season. We beat the ghosts of the past of the Warriors against us. We beat them in the playoff series. It's going to feel so good to watch national media afterwards because, listen, I'm a huge Nick Wright first take fan, and Nick over the last Nick over the last week has kind of cooled off on the Warriors, and I think he's close to picking us in a playoff series. But Chris Broussard is like going all in, like the Rockets have no chance against the Warriors, and it would feel so good to just see all of these guys like, oh my God, this team that's going to feed my ratings the rest of the playoffs just got eliminated by this team that only plays defense and nobody wants to watch, and it would feel so great. And then
the Rockets ruined the LeBron-Steph showdown in the second round.
Oh no.
That would be amazing. Speaking of the other part of that.
Yeah. So as far as the Timberwolves versus the Lakers, I'm going to go hot take as well. But this is not really a hot take if you've kept up with the pod for the last few weeks pre-playoffs. I think we're a good matchup against the Lakers. I would rather the Lakers win. I think the times we've played the Timberwolves, we've beaten them some of those times, but we just don't seem to have an answer for Naz Reid, and we certainly don't have an answer for Anthony Edwards, especially because of the way he draws fouls, and because we don't seem to have too much of an answer against guards that are really shifty and that draw a lot of fouls and promotes a lot of contact. And to me, that's the one way you can kind of beat our team is if press are calling everything. And I think as a really, I don't know, convincing is perhaps the right word, way of drawing fouls where there's just not really much you can do once that starts. And if you go watch his games against us, he always has a lot of free throws. And then from 3, it's just magnet ball against us every single time. And I'm kind of a lot more scared of that than I am of a Lakers team that doesn't have the size to guard Alperen Sengun. The way they've typically guarded Alperen Sengun when they haven't had Anthony Davis is to put LeBron on him. And if we're going to put LeBron on Sengun, first of all, I trust Sengun to score enough and efficiently enough. Second of all, you're going to tire LeBron out on offense over a 7-game series especially. And I think over the course of a series, I think we can exploit that. Obviously, we need to be shooting well, but I also love the fact that we have so many defenders we can throw at both LeBron and Luka. And yes, Luka has cooked us in the past. At this point, you're picking your poison. But I'd rather it be the Lakers, and also because the payoff would be higher, right? If we beat the Warriors and the Lakers, that's that's Nirvana.
The
like
juice
that is,
from that.
yeah,
The Rockets would be the it team.
Yeah, and you could get swept by the Thunder in the Western Conference Finals, but this would be just an insane season. And I actually think I would actually back us to beat both of these teams, both the Warriors and the Lakers. And I would love to
advantage.
Yeah, and I would love to get the chance to actually, test that theory and see how we would do in those situations.
Yeah, pretty high pressure. Absolutely. Yeah, we talk about stress testing. That's the playoffs. Yeah, you can't stress test more than going against LeBron and Steph.
Yeah, and you establish yourself, like, if you beat those two teams, like, that's the passing of the torch. And I think that's if we play our type of game, low scoring defensive battle against two of the two last remaining true superstars, like celebrities of the league, I think that cements your reputation as this is the new Heat.
Yep.
kind
And
of
it puts you on the radar even more.
you clearly sweep away the Harden era, the what are threes, these guys, these star players don't play defense. These guys are an offensive, juggernaut team, and you reinstate kind of a different type of culture. And with the Heat kind of on the downward slope, there's no real team to pick up that reputation around the league, and the league has always had teams like that. You've had the Heat, you've had the obviously the great and grand Grizzlies. You had the Raptors at a certain point when Kawhi was there with
Fred
Marc
VanVleet.
Gasol, when Fred VanVleet and Marc Gasol and Serge Ibaka, and believe I'm forgetting some important people on that team, but I really think that at that point, like, that's the final nail in the coffin for these, for these older teams. The Lakers will become Luka's team as LeBron fades away, and I think this is probably the final nail in the coffin for the Warriors. And so I would love for us to be the easy transition from these guys kind of taking a back seat. And I think once people are actually forced to watch us play our style of basketball, it doesn't look pretty in highlights. But when you watch us play, it really gives you a vibe of a basketball from a different time. Like, guys are giving it their all, guys are playing insane level defense, guys are being physical, and there's no true star out there. There's no bail you out. They have to keep that effort 100% of the time. And I think I'm not gonna say it's a connoisseurs type of team, but it kind of is. If you like basketball for the traditional sense of it, I think we are the team that represents that the most. Just because we don't really shoot that many threes compared to a team like the Celtics or the Cavs, who shoot the most in the league. And there's a lot of storylines that you can kind of get invested into. And I would really I really want to see us, at least, even if we lose, I want to face those teams. I want to see how we do against those type of veteran teams.
It would be more fun. And the way I'll close the loop on all of this, I just want to stress, and this is my biggest overarching point, and we'll talk more about the specific round one matchup for the Rockets in our pod later this week, once we know the actual opponent, which will be after tonight's play-in game between the Warriors and the Grizzlies. There are very valid arguments you can make in both directions, because the margin is so much closer than simply looking at the bracket and seeing the seeds would have you to believe. The Grizzlies are in the 8th spot and they're 48-34. The Lakers are in the 3 spot and they're 50-32. We're talking about a 2-game difference over 82 games. That's almost nothing, being the difference between number 3 and number 8. So it can be very easy to look at the bracket and say, oh, I want the lower seed, or I guess the higher seed, depending on how you define that, but wanting the worst team on paper, the worst seed on paper, to win because that's a better matchup. It can be, but in this particular case, that's not a given at all, because the margin is very, very slim between these teams. And so a lot of it's going to come down to matchups, who's playing hot at the right time, who isn't. So there are very defensible arguments you can make in both directions. And I think me and you, Paolo, I think we both argued pretty compelling points, and I don't think it's not even close to being determined as far as which of us is right and which of it's wrong. And honestly, it could easily go the other way, and who knows, it may end up splitting. But that's the point that I will leave off on. The gap in the Western Conference specifically is so small that, we can quibble over our exact opinions of certain matchups and how it goes down. But honestly, we're talking about maybe moving the margin from 53% to 54% or 47% to 48%. It is incredibly fine. It is an incredibly narrow band. And so it's going to be fascinating to watch. There's a lot to talk about, but there are no easy answers, because it's a deep Western Conference with a lot of good teams. Rockets did a hell of a job getting to number 2. And honestly, they'd probably be at 54, even 55 wins if they hadn't taken the foot off the gas. But nothing is going to be given in the playoffs at all. Lots of these teams can win. They can also lose. Hopefully the Rockets are on the right side of this starting Easter Sunday. All right, well, that's where we'll wrap things for today. And if you want more content before our next show, which again will be later this week once we know the matchup, the best place to get content for both Paolo and myself is online. You can follow me on Twitter or X at Ben Dubose, Paolo at Paolo Alves NBA, and this show at The Logger Line. If you go to that Logger Line page, you can find our link tree that's got links to our distribution partners like Apple, Google, and Spotify. If you kind of subscribe, leave a positive review at your location of choice, we greatly appreciate that. Also, on that same link tree, you can find links to friends, sponsors, partners of the program, USA Today's Rockets Wire, Carback Brewing, Sports Talk 790. Hit up those links, and you can enjoy their content as well. So with those plugs complete, we'll adjourn for today. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.